Stop, that guarantee to keep the Irish border open. Wouldn't it have been more sensible just to say, yeah, OK, we'll put an end date on the backstop. We'll put it far enough in the future that really we don't think it's ever realistic that it'll get to that. I've heard internally that Germany might have been open to that idea, but there was pushback from other member states.
The BBC's Europe editor, Katya Adler, who's in London to record her Brexit Cast podcast in front of a live audience, the Daily Mail's political editor, Jason Groves, and The Guardian's Afua Hirsch. Start, Jason, if we could, with the front page of the Sunday Times, which is, as I said, a good read-through and what the outcome of those talks has been so far.
Absolutely. I mean, it's going to be an extraordinary week this week. We could leave without a deal. We could have Brexit delayed for another year. We could have
As things stand, I think it's 11 o'clock on Friday. If we haven't got a counter-proposal and if...
And they are dividing the Tories. Now, the piece in the front of the Sunday Times, it's in one or two of the other papers today, is looking at one of the key Labour demands. Because, to be honest, they've not got a lot of faith that Theresa May is going to be around for very long, and they fear that a Eurosceptic leader. But I think the big politics are very difficult. I think there's maybe a 1 in 3 chance of them actually working.
And it's not just Theresa May backbenchers over these talks. A lot of Labour Party people, according to the Observer there, are worried as well.
Well, the papers are full of ambivalence about these talks and how it's a case of saying to Labour, I don't think you understand how great the withdrawal agreement I'm offering really is. The other half, and there's clearly a rising sense that he needs to be taken seriously as somebody who could be gaining ground out of this process.
In some respects, it's a great opportunity for Jeremy Corbyn, this, isn't it? I'm the man compromising, I'm trying to get us away from no deal, and to appeal to people who have not given him a hearing up to now.
It is, but it carries risks as well, because play for this week. If it doesn't go well, now Jeremy Corbyn is complicit, whereas before he could have stepped back and said that this was a Tory shambles. And
showing just how badly the Tories are doing with young voters. A big majority of people there who go, you've got
no,
it there,
I think
Jason.
we've got it here.
So
Yeah.
Right at the top there, those figures, that's the older voters, 65 plus, lots and lots of people voting Tory. Then you go right.
That does look like a problem.
Pretty, it's only one poll, but it's pretty catastrophic. Katya, we talk about these things week after week after week, almost as if the rest of the European continent doesn't exist at all.
That's how they feel.
That's how they feel.
Yes.
But there's an interesting story in the Observer suggesting that as Theresa May goes, and she's got an ally in Angela Merkel, presumably against President Macron of France.
Yeah,
what do you make of
I'd
this?
warn against that because we've heard that before, haven't we? I think, yes, the Observer says she'll then, as always, be asked to leave the room while they discuss what to do about her extension request. Very importantly, they have to come to a unanimous decision under EU law. And fireworks are predicted, although whether it's a massive display or sort of a regular one, we don't quite know at the moment. So basically, the Prime Minister has asked for another extension ending at the end of June.
Yeah.
So there are EU leaders at the moment who say, well, you know what, the advantage to that would keep MPs under pressure. Yes. Because if it's a short extension, they have to come to a decision. And based on past performance, EU leaders worry this could just go on forever. You have a longer extension and everyone will still go round and round. Donald Tusk...
To put it bluntly,
yes?
They're really fed up with us.
They are really fed up with this process. They are not really fed up with the United Kingdom. And I think that's really important to distinguish. And of course, now some leaders are saying, might the UK change their mind? But whatever happens, if we leave, it is in the EU's interest, socially, politically and economically, to keep us as close as possible and to keep relations as close as possible. Those who see a longer extension would be a good idea. So you've got Donald Tusk, the President of the European Council. He's calling for this so-called flextension. So it's a longer extension.
But we can get out at any...
It's been ratified. But then comes from Emmanuel Macron, who has been saying loud and clear, do not take any extension for granted, because you, Theresa May, have to come to us with a very clear plan. Again, I would put a slight health warning on this.
That's what he said last time, isn't it?
He said it last time. And I think just like when the Prime Minister speaks, or Jeremy Corbyn, they're speaking also to their own audiences. So is Emmanuel Macron.
A certain amount of role-playing.
There's a certain...
May and Jeremy Corbyn in talks about Brexit. And Dominic Raab has fired off both barrels in your sister paper, the Mail on Sunday.
Dominic Raab is very cross about it. Now, Mr. Raab is obviously going to be a leader.
So there's really a lot of abuse. There's a lot of abuse in politics generally, Afua, and you've got an interesting piece from The Observer here about attempts to dial it down a little bit.
Yeah, I have to say, in the context of these kind of future Tory leadership contenders playing to their audience, and in the context of how out of touch Tory leadership is with young voters. This seems like a little too little, too late. But there's this idea from this new One Nation group of Tories that's to counter the ERG as a new balance of power within the Conservative Party, that this directive to tone down the rhetoric and reprimanding some of the stronger language we've had about the Second World War and Dunkirk. And it's because of that memory of total warfare in Europe that we have the European Union in the first place. And that's one of the reasons I think many Europeans culturally are very worried about this to bolster their case. So I think it's a welcome, if maybe an effective warning.
I think sometimes what's forgotten in the political debate here is that it's also heard over there. And the papers are read over there as well. So, for example, Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Conservative MP, tweeted last week that if there is a longer extension, if the UK were to stay in the EU for longer, that we should be very difficult members of the EU. And this also does play to EU fears.
Tweet. I think we can possibly see it.
Yes.
I don't know if we can. Can we see the Jacob Rees-Mogg tweet? We can't see the Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Okay.
Sorry.
So, yes, and that is part of Emmanuel Macron's argument, because he says, you know, we've had enough of this drama and we need to be able to pass the EU budget. We need to elect a new European Commission chief, a new European parliamentary chief. A meeting of the 27 EU ambassadors on Friday, and they have EU lawyers already thinking about how to get around it if the UK were to try and block the budget, for example.
Jason, I must ask you about Andrea Leadsom's piece in the Sunday Telegraph. She's joined.
There's talk of a mass walkout of ministers if we end up in a long extension, or what some of them consider to be a dirty deal with Corbyn on a customs union.
Why also a lot of ministers are worried about fighting the...
If they fail to deliver Brexit, any election, local election, European election, general election,
they think they're going to be taken to pieces by UKIP and
yeah, which of course was partly what this referendum was all about, putting to bed in the first place. This piece from Mrs. Leadsom is pretty loyal today. I have to say, it's making the case for doing the deal with Corbyn, saying, you know, for many, working with the Leader of the Opposition is totally unacceptable.
A lot of talk about revoking Article 50, just pulling the plug on the whole thing, beginning the end of this week, if we haven't got an extension, and if it's that or no deal. Is this a possibility for Parliament to look at, do you think? Story about not the lighter side of Brexit, but also the effect of Brexit already on all our summer holidays. That's in the
right.
People, I think.
It's in the People, yes. Summer breaks get cheaper, and it's about tour operators who are worried compensation or could get stuck abroad. What happens if we need... There's all sorts of concerns. And it's also just to say that the concern is spread across the rest of the European Union as well. So particularly those countries that are popular destinations, Spain first and foremost, they're not getting the bookings that they're used to. And in general, and this is why the EU wants to come to a conclusion here as well, because all this uncertainty is costly for European businesses, it's worrying for European citizens, and it affects international investment in the whole of the EU as well.
I noticed with interest, I booked tickets for Disneyland for 2 children during the Easter holidays, and I noticed they come with free Brexit insurance now.
Free Brexit insurance, there we are. Now,
it's clearly effective.
He said that's enough Brexit. There is one other story that we want from the Sunday Times there.
It gets more absurd. With
She's having a really hard time, we should say, from the press.
I think there is something really dark about this. I spoke a lot around the time of the engagement and the wedding about some of the darker media. The prosthetic bump that comes with movement.
We live in a very, very strange world, full of fake news. We've avoided fake news most so far, and we'll carry on doing so. Thanks to all of you, and so to
the UK after Brexit. And I think, you know, rhetoric aside and negotiations aside, this was a very, very clear message about what the EU's intent is. You know, it wasn't just out of solidarity with the UK, of course. The EU27 are very worried in a wider way about Russia. Salisbury, though, felt very close to home for them. Yes. As a journalist, I think a key moment for me was when I was talking to one of the secret squirrel contacts we like to talk about, and he said to me, I'm actually not going to speak to you on this evening, Katya, because I don't want the Brexit negotiations to happen through you or your colleague, Laura. And that was really, I mean, that was kind of really interesting because the two sides weren't talking. They were not communicating. They didn't want to sort of communicate through us, if you like.
And that was fascinating. Yeah, there were certainly moments where people were, well, no, we can...
Instantly regretted it.
And he said, so am I!
No, he had a half of Guinness, which he didn't even finish.
Yeah. Did he buy you a drink?
The drinks.
Right now. But there is a concerted campaign with some powerful voices who are pushing for it.
And the EU's very
Yeah, they would.
I mean, you know, they would like it. They're never hidden the fact that they feel that Brexit is a terrible thing. They don't agree with those in the UK who think it's a chance for the future. They say over and over again they feel it's a lose-lose situation. But as they pointed out in the withdrawal agreement, they think the UK will lose most of all. So, you know, it's a bit sort of like Animal Farm. Everyone's a loser, but some lose more than others. And they think that's very much the UK. But they are sorry. Well, I do have to point out they're realists. So this sort of conspiracy idea that the EU is plotting to have another referendum is not something that you come across. You know, they say, you know, Emmanuel Macron, any chance you might change your mind? You know, the door is always open. And no, we're not going to sing ABBA right now. But they really believe it is happening, and they are continuing. And that's when, as we go now into this next stage of negotiations, you've got both sides now, the UK and the EU, saying we want to.
It's a greater cause in their party. I mean, it's one of the interesting things, actually, we've seen since the referendum, is that politics is split down Leave-Remain lines. You know, party alliances are not what they were. And that's made, in some ways, the Commons sort of unwhippable, to use that ridiculous Westminster word that if you're not a sad nerd, you think, what on earth is that about? So I think, I suppose, their own little talks in parallel to the 27 process.
Which they weren't allowed to do until now,
they
right?
weren't allowed
We've
to do
talked
until
about
now.
Ireland as a problem, but it's only now, in this stage, they're allowed to sit together.
Right.
The difference is that I'd say that the rest of the EU, so the EU 26 in this case, and the heads of EU institutions are 150% behind the Irish government, and they mean it when they say, you have to be happy with this arrangement. They take the Good Friday Agreement very seriously, and that is a very real concern. For Spain, it's kind of more of a national pride issue, and it is seen as such. It is used by the Spanish Prime Minister for domestic reasons. And if he were to use this and to put into peril an agreement, it's economic arguments. I mean, when it comes to fishing, it's people's livelihoods. Of course, I'm not belittling that. But what I mean is, when it comes to the Irish border situation, people remember the Troubles. It's about peace. It's about violence. And I think that's what really catapults the Irish issue into such a status of its own.
No question about that. And the other thing is, it's a serious point. No politician in Ireland, the UK, anywhere around the EU wants in any way tip the balance towards going back to a much more dangerous and unhappy time.
Right, okay. And we're only going to give you one question, Elliot. That was because that was quite a long one, wasn't it?
But it's an interesting thing. So people might, if you don't remember Vince Cable and his, would it be spring conference speech?
Yeah, it was.
Factor.
I think that what's interesting, what will be interesting to watch now in the negotiations, is whether immigration is used as a bargaining chip, actually. Because Amber Rudd has been noticeably quiet about immigration figures and about promises to bring down immigration. It's thought very possible that during the negotiation process, which will continue past the year from now, and that's something we haven't said yet.
Brexit cast will go on forever.
Because you have so many EU countries, Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, for example, they have a lot of their citizens living in the UK. They have other citizens.
And if Europe wants to play a future role in this global world order, so for example, to complete the Schengen area through a functioning border protection, a common security and defence policy,
salaries between men and women, Germany performs far worse than the European average. You have quite poor representation in the tops of companies, in the German parliament. If you were German Chancellor, what would you do to change that? Shouldn't that really be changed already? It's quite a surprise for a leading country like Germany.
We are leading by good example, but we're counting on businesses' own responsibility. But it's clear to us that if businesses don't recognise the importance of the advancement...
We've talked about women. What about when it comes to balancing the books in Germany? There is quite an obsession here with...
that we've invested a lot in recent years, that we've made available a lot of money, that the economy has grown. It shows that responsible budget policy and investing into the future are not mutually exclusive. I'm from a federal state which has a very difficult budget position, and there's nothing that hampers growth and investment more than debt. It's not a question of a lack of money. Our main problem at the moment is that our system is too complicated. We have budgets in our ministries where money hasn't been used because the process
has gone down since you were voted head of the CDU party at the end of 2018. Obviously, it's difficult because you're not actually in a position of power at the moment in government. Can you pull it off?
First of all, we, as the CDU, have always said that according to our tradition,